That was OPM, Better Days. Don't ask me why I'm playing OPM. I was going through some old CDs that I listened to in my early teens and discovered it and thought that was about the only good song on the album, so I got to play it today. The rest are complete horseshit, but never mind. Hello again, Resistors. Today is September the 11th, but it's the 12th, 2011. I'm your host, Keelan Balderson, and you are listening to the WideShut Webcast on Resistance Radio. That's wideshut.co.uk, and for all Resistance Radio stuff, go to resistradio.com. And I'm sure you can take a wild guess about what today's main topic is going to be. It starts with a 9, and it ends with an 11. Yes, it's 10 years and 1 day since the Twin Towers and Building 7 collapsed into their own footprints at near free fall speeds. And it's funny because this time 10 years ago, they'd already figured out who was responsible. No inquiry, no investigation, no evidence. But at this time in 2001, all the mainstream news networks were sowing the seed for what, quite frankly, would become the biggest lie ever told to the Western people. All you got to do is go back to archive.org or on YouTube, most of it's up there. But within hours, the media were unquestioningly quoting CIA, Pentagon officials, in quote marks there, officials, unnamed source at the Pentagon, saying that Bin Laden was responsible. And there was no evidence when they said it in 2001, and there's still no evidence when they say it now in 2011. Where is the evidence? People talk about their smoking guns, what makes it obvious to them that we've been lied to. And yeah, seeing 3 high-rise buildings somehow magically collapse through the path of most resistance due to fire, when no steel frame buildings like that prior to 9/11 had ever collapsed due to fire in that manner, that's enough in itself. But for me, it's Bin Laden. The myth they created about this guy. It allowed them to illegally invade Afghanistan. It allowed them to run with the idea of Al-Qaeda wherever they wanted it to be. And of course, Al-Qaeda was really an intranet system used by the Mujahideen in the 80s when they were working with the CIA. And that's not just me saying that, that's French intelligence. Go back and read some of the things by, what's his name? Pierre Henry. So for me, the smoking gun is Bin Laden. It's the key that unravels the whole fairy tale. Because no matter how you spin it, there is no evidence that he was involved. They just kept repeating it until it was burnt into everyone's brain, and people sit there and think, well, what is the evidence that Bin Laden was involved? And you start to kind of have a look around, and there's none. And let me try and put it into context for people. When somebody commits some kind of crime, I don't know, major tax fraud, for example, well, some companies get away with that, but we're just using it as an example. They gather the evidence. When there's a strong enough case, they indict the person, charge them with the crime, and then they're brought before a jury. And if the evidence is presented and it can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt, then that person is prosecuted for that crime. Yet, when Bin Laden is accused of the biggest terror attack on the US, killing nearly 3,000 people, it's probably beyond that now, with first responders dying from lung problems and stuff when they were told the air was safe to breathe. But the point is, they never indicted Bin Laden. They never presented any evidence to the public, or even to the Taliban, who were accused of hiding him. They say, show us some evidence, we'll hand him over. And they just say, no, you're just going to have to take our word for it. We've got bombs. The FBI never listed 9/11 as one of bin Laden's crimes. In fact, Rex Toome, FBI spokesperson, went on record and said they had no hard evidence that bin Laden was involved. And nearly 10 years later, when they supposedly capture him in Pakistan, they assassinate him, dump his body in the sea, so nobody can, confirm anything they're saying. Maybe they did that because if they brought him to trial, there would be no evidence. And of course, it's highly likely that he was already dead anyway, so the whole thing was an entire hoax. Just show me the evidence. Where is it? It's on them to prove their theory about what happened. And so far, just the basic thing of who was behind it, the fundamental thing that should have been the focus of the investigation, and there's no evidence for the person they've claimed did it. Oh, but there's the December 2001 tape where he admits to doing it, silly. Well, do yourself a favour if you're in that camp. Read and watch something that isn't from the mainstream media over here. Look outside of CNN and Fox News and BBC. That tape that they magically discovered in a house in Afghanistan out of the blue is a proven criminal hoax. The Pentagon translators who made up all the rubbish that they said was on that tape, they need to be in jail for aiding crimes against humanity. But they're not. We probably don't even know who the translators were, because of course these organisations are secret and criminal and corrupt. But let me tell you a little something about the December 2001 confession tape. Apart from it looking like a completely different person, if we ignore that, put that to one side, the top Arabists in the world got a copy of that tape, translated it themselves, and clearly demonstrate that the US government lied about what this supposed bin Laden character even said on the tape. He didn't confess at all. He doesn't confess anything. And I'll put it to you, who are you going to believe? The Pentagon, the CIA, top secret organisations that have since admitted to considering faking bin Laden and even Saddam Hussein tapes? Or are we going to believe world-renowned Arabic scholars, world-renowned Arabists with no vested interest in believing either version? Unless, of course, you want to stretch it to that we'd nuke the Arab world and they'd have nothing to make their living on anymore. Okay, we can stretch it to that far, but come on. I know who I'm going to believe. And look, I'm not saying bin Laden is a good guy, but he's a pawn in the agenda. And when you look at the facts and realise that there really is no evidence for bin Laden's involvement, well then you have to start questioning, well, who really did do it? And I'm not somebody that, argues tooth and nail that there was no Muslims on the planes. There could have been patsies or whatever, but that doesn't mean the whole thing came from them on their own. They got passports into the country fast-tracked through the consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which had been going on since the 80s. They were tailed, they had Israeli Mossad living next door, things like that. They had limo rides in the middle of the night, according to eyewitnesses, all these bizarre things. So even if there were hijackers, which I'm entirely open to, obviously, it's not like they just did it by themselves. But in case you think I'm making a lot of this up, Arabist Dr. Abdul El Husseini Gernot Rotter, Professor of Islamic and Arabic Studies at the Asia-Africa Institute and the University of Hamburg. They all say America faked the translation to fit with their agenda. When they wanted to hear something that put guilt on bin Laden, then they just decided it was in the tape when it wasn't. And then you may go, oh, but what about the December 2002 audio recording where he confesses? Well, even The Guardian published a report that disputes that. Swiss scientists, 95% sure that bin Laden recording was fake. Researchers at the Institute for Perceptual Artificial Intelligence in Switzerland believe the message was recorded by an imposter. But America said that it's real, and Tony Blair said that it's real, so it must be real. Because, of course, people like George Bush and Tony Blair have proven to never lie, ever, ever. They're just nice people looking out for our interests. It's ridiculous. There's no evidence. And if Vini Vidi Charlie Vici can come and see and U-turn, fair enough. And he can verbally attack ladies in the street. But unless he provides some actual evidence about bin Laden or something other than Lego and eggs, then he's just a phony revolutionary blowing hot air to feed his own ego. The arrogance of that man to stand there at Trafalgar Square like 9/11 was his day. And that anybody actually speaking about 9/11, you know, on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, was invading his day. And I've got nothing against Charlie Veach for changing his mind, but he's tactless and he loves the attention. So as a person, I don't like him. Sorry. I think he's full of shit. And as far as the awful conspiracy road trip show, I am working on a rebuttal of that, which I think should be out tomorrow if I can pull my finger out. So I'm not going to go into that today. Well, we might do with my guest coming up. But yeah, we actually have a guest tonight, folks. I'm shortly going to be bringing on Liam Dunn. Liam is not a conspiracy theorist per se. In fact, he's a budding filmmaker. He recently worked on The Hot Potato with Ray Winston. And he also, well, actually I've been told not to say this because the other host of that show, I don't know why, but I will say anyway, Liam also works for my pro wrestling website doing a podcast which now airs on WNJC Philadelphia in the US. So yeah, he's one of my good buddies, and he contacted me to come on the show today because he questions 9/11 like a lot of people in the public question 9/11. And as far as well, I do want to kind of address this because it's a good example, I think, of why 9/11 truth is held back. But this other guy that does the other podcast with us for my other website, and it's not personal. So if you're listening, don't think I'm trying to pick a fight here or anything stupid. Whatever I say on this show is simply to provoke thought. So my point is, for you to say I can't bring up something that my guest does as part of their biography, something I've been a major part of, this other podcast that we do, I find it a perfect example of why 10 years on we still haven't had a reinvestigation into 9/11, or at least any proper recognition for the questions that we ask. Because there's a element of self-censorship, and people don't want to go there. But why would I admit part of my guest biography? And it may be because obviously you don't want to be associated with us and these opinions. You might be scared, you might think, oh, the government, you know, I'm going to be on a government list somewhere or something like that. And if that's the case, first off, don't worry about that. I think that kind of thinking is blown way out of proportion. If anyone's going to be murdered by the powers that be, it's not going to be you, or it's certainly not going to be you, and it's not going to be me. So the other option is you think that me and Liam are some kind of crazy, conspiracy theorists, and you don't want to be associated with that. Well, if that's the case, then I hope you're listening to the show, because I'd like you to contact me and present some evidence that Bin Laden carried out 9/11. I mean, if you believe the official story and you think we're crazy, then, drop me an email or something. Who's crazy? The person that believes Bin Laden did 9/11 with absolutely no evidence, or the person asking for evidence? And on that other podcast, I'm polite. I don't go into these things because it's not relevant. And sometimes we even joke around. And I happily play the role of the silly conspiracy theorist. When I missed the show a few times the other year, we even joked that the Illuminati had kidnapped me and things like that. It's funny. But today, this is not a joke. I don't spend hours each day writing articles. I don't make 4.5 hour long documentaries. I don't force myself, despite being incredibly nervous, to go on overseas talk radio with people I've never spoke to before. I don't get up here every week because it's a joke. This is incredibly serious information. And you can stick your head in the sand, you can ignore it, you can make light of it if we bring it up. You can tell us that you don't want us to mention something that you're a part of, even if we're a part of it, because you don't want to be associated with us. But I care about the world that we live in, and I'm proud of the work that I do. And I'm not going to, pick and choose what I talk about because you don't want to accept the information. And again, this isn't personal or anything like that. I'm not trying to get at you. I'm just trying to show an example to my audience of how some people just don't want to go there. And Liam, if you are listening now, if you go to the show page, if you scroll up, there'll be a click to talk button, which you can press, and then you'll come up on my switchboard and I can bring you on that way. Or I can find you on Skype and do that instead, but I don't see you on my switchboard just yet. But anyway, back to Liam Dunn, if you want to know some more backstory. You probably have seen him in one of my videos, the one where I was handing out leaflets about corporate tax evasion. He was the camera guy for that. That video is up on my YouTube. We were basically handing out those leaflets about Philip Green of the Arcadia Group and his tax evasion. Let me see if this works. This might take us off the air. I've never had someone call me on Skype. Folks, this is Liam Dunn. How
Hello.
are you doing, Liam?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me on the show, Keelan.
No worries. And I think it'd be quite interesting to go back to when you kind of first looked into 9/11, because what was it, like 4 years ago when we were at college, and you actually brought up that you'd seen loose change during media studies. Yeah. And I was there like, oh, you can make a conspiracy out of anything, blah, blah, blah. And then 4 years later, I'm like looking at this stuff 24/7, and, and you're kind of just doing the normal thing. So,
yeah.
But you're here, and you got some questions about 9/11. Yeah. And hopefully we can discuss them. I mean, have you got a list? Have you got some points, or?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things I want to talk about, and I say couple lightly here. I have got about 1.5 pages of things I want to discuss very briefly, if you can say briefly.
Okay, well, just fire away, and I'll offer my input and kind of bring the listeners in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was listening to the show before I came on, and I mean, I'm not a massive conspiracy theorist. I'm not part of the 9/11 movement. I'm just a guy who has a lot of questions. I don't think that we have been given everything, all the details about that day. I think things are still very sketchy. The first thing I really want to talk about is actually Flight 11 and Flight 175. Now, the official report claims that the planes were hijacked by these terrorists who were actually amateur pilots. And you mentioned earlier on the show this BBC documentary, 9/11 Conspiracy Road Trip, an absolutely awful documentary that was just the most horrendously put together, so incredibly biased.
It was obvious. Even my mum, who, well, I would consider her awake, but I walked in the house and she's like, "What a load of rubbish that was," and it's like, it obviously was. I mean,
no. And what really, really annoyed me about this, more than the Lego and the eggs and the flour, more than that, what annoyed me was that one of their first things they did, they took one of the people in the show onto a plane and just gave him a 30-minute lesson and just said, you could possibly, easily hijack the plane and crash it into the Twin Towers. But what I don't understand about this is that you're basically saying that flying a tiny four-man plane is the equivalent to flying a passenger liner Boeing 757.
I mean, it's not the same, is it? I mean, some people claim that it's easier to fly a 757, but even if that's true, if you're learning to fly in this small two-man plane, then you're not learning to fly in a 757, so it's not the same. And to go on a documentary and say, this young girl can now fly this plane, this means she can take a 757, take it beyond the maximum operating speed of a Boeing, and manage to crash it into a target. It's not the same. It's not like they just proved that the hijackers did it by flying this girl up in a little plane.
Exactly. And so the guy who was the instructor was basically telling the audience, all you need is a 30-minute flying lesson and you can be a pilot for an aeroplane. That doesn't make sense. To me, that's the equivalent of saying you've passed your driving lesson, you passed your driving test in a 3-door little car, so go and drive that petrol tanker.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make sense to me.
And that's the big problem with that show. They didn't go to any opposing views. It was like, these are the experts, these are the only experts, this is how it goes. But there is a whole entire organization called Pilots for 9/11 Truth that have a completely opposite opinion to that guy that was showing it. So even if, that guy may have had a point, well, let's go to these pilots that disagree, but they don't present that side of it.
Exactly. Oh, sorry, continue.
Well, it was the same with everything. They went to the expert at the Pentagon, who had letters from Bush and Rumsfeld on his wall, and he sat there and said, well, I saw bits of a plane at the Pentagon, I saw stewardesses blown up all over the floor, which is fair enough, he may have, but there are also eyewitnesses that say they saw nothing. So there's a clear doubt there, so even that surely would warrant some kind of further investigation if people disagree on fundamental things like whether there was a plane or there wasn't.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to that BBC documentary that we both watched, the host, who I believe is a comedian, I'm not familiar with him, but he was having a big argument with these guys in a hotel room, and he said, okay, no one here can prove that Santa's not real, and all the guys who believe that the official story was incorrect, they all said, oh, you're taking the piss now, and he goes, yeah, I am taking the piss. How biased is that? I mean, you're not trying to give a two-sided argument. You're basically trying to tell everybody this is the story, and I think that's wrong. I don't think they should be doing that. And the fact that he said he admitted he's taking the piss out of them, I find to be quite offensive, really.
Well, it was clear to me from the get-go that this wasn't really about presenting the truth as much as it was about taking some young people that may not be fully confident in the environment, may not know everything down to a T, and taking them to these professionals that could shake their foundations, just because they're just young people. They're not used to talking to men in suits in the middle of high-rise frigging buildings, are they? Why didn't they call up some of the experts where these young people probably got their opinions from? Why not call up Richard Gage and take him on a little school trip on a bus to... Do you know what I mean? They set it out deliberately to say, look, these are young people, they're silly, here are the adults, let's show you what the real truth is, when really they're just showing only one side of the debate.
Yeah. And I mean, earlier you did mention the whole Pentagon thing, and I wanted to actually, this is where the majority of my argument comes from, the whole Pentagon Flight 77 issue. The first thing I really just want to say is I don't understand that even now, 10 years on, we do not have a decent video of the crash. Now, I'm not saying I want to see a handheld sort of Blair Witch Project look at a plane going into a building, but this is the bloody Pentagon we're talking about. This isn't just some corner shop. This is the Pentagon. It's got, I would say, square inch by square inch, or square area, whatever it is. I'm not great with maths, I'll be honest, but it's one of the most watched buildings with security, other than
or you
White
would
House.
think it would be.
Oh yeah.
So So basically, yeah, you're right. You would think there would be cameras everywhere on, one of the biggest military buildings in America.
Exactly.
And if they've got the film, then why not just show everybody and have it done with?
Oh,
Or it's so insignificant that, they don't even have to address us, which is bullshit, because polls in America, at least, are massive percentages of people believe that 9/11 wasn't what they said it was. So they're not doing themselves any favours by hiding any video footage that they might have.
Well, the American government thinks that just releasing 6 stills from a security camera is enough to prove that a plane hit, and that's ridiculous. And it's like they've taken the pictures of what they've released, and they've digitized it, and they go, yeah, look, you can clearly see a plane in the picture. And in one of them, it's like, look, right behind that pillar, you can quite clearly see a plane with smoke behind it. Now, this is the next part of my argument. Where did that smoke on the, and I say in quotation marks here, where did the smoke from the plane come from? There is no mention of smoke from Flight 77 in the official report. None at all. And you can't tell me that the smoke that they're seeing is debris from the ground, because firstly, mud, it gives off a very different colour to smoke. And secondly, that plane didn't even touch plane again in quotation marks, didn't even touch the ground. How can that be debris? You know what does have smoke behind it, though? A missile. I'm not saying that it is, but if you're going to try and add smoke to something, give it logic. There's nothing that says in the official, not even the eyewitnesses said, a plane that was on fire hit the Pentagon. Where did that smoke come from then?
Well, even if it was a plane, and I mean, we can't discount any kind of, let's not go either way, let's just try and investigate and find out. But even if there was a plane, you have pilots saying, well, hang on a minute, I would even find it difficult to do this U-turn and corkscrew down and level off perfectly to hit the Pentagon. So there's questions on every level. It depends where you want to take it. But at every level, there's still something that isn't clear.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, like, Honey Honyo, I believe, is the hijacker from Flight 77. Yeah. Apparently, this amateur pilot...
Damn it.
All right.
Continue.
Sorry about that. Anyway, where was I in my notes? Yeah, so, yeah, you're right. The fact that he turned, it was 180 degree in air. In real... Sorry, I can't say in real life, but, scientific facts tell us that if he tried to do that move, the plane would fall out of the sky.
Well, a lot of people don't like the Jesse Ventura conspiracy theory show for good reason, because it's a bit hammed up and it looks really cheesy, and they've got that woman from Channel 4, June Sarpong, on it. But on his show, they go into a flight simulator. They try and recreate the maneuver with a pilot, and it's difficult. It can't be done. They're saying, look, I'm spiraling out of control. I'm crashing. So again, it's this BBC takes one side of the argument, they present it, but they don't go to other people that say, well, look, no. Can't we have at least a debate between these two sides to enlighten us further, or is it just a case of we're going to show you what we want, shut the hell up?
But then again, can we trust the BBC? The BBC is government funded after all. They can put in whatever they want. That's what
As is Channel 4, I believe. I found that out recently. So two of our biggest channels here in the UK are state-owned. Lovely.
Fantastic. But keeping on with the whole Pentagon issue, the other thing, of course, is, you know, you've got to look at the crash site of the Pentagon itself. And, I mean, given the diameter of a Boeing 757, there is no way at all that a plane that is fully intact could fit into a hole of roughly 18 to 20 feet, even, or something like that. You know, where did that plane go? Now, the body of the plane could potentially have gone in there, but if that's the case,
where's the wings
and the tail section? They would have been smashed into the building, and if they didn't go into the building, we would have seen them outside.
Or we could even agree that they disintegrated, but you would assume that if they disintegrated, they hit the Pentagon or hit something and left some great bloody big marks somewhere that would clearly show where the wings hit. But we don't see that. We just see this sort of perfectly round hole, and, you know...
Yeah, I mean, even if it did disintegrate, there would, you know, it wouldn't just evaporate into the air. We would have found debris of the wings and the tail section if that is the case. But other than that, the other thing is, of course, the actual explosion. Now, I personally think, you know, you look at the actual explosion, the pictures that they've released of the plane, the so-called plane crashing.
Yeah, the sudden orange flash, and that's about it.
It looks. I'm sorry, that explosion looks way too small to say a passenger plane crashed into it. You look at the World Trade Centers, and like especially with Flight 11, you see it, and it's a ball of flame that covers the entire floors that it's on, above and below. And I'm just looking at the pictures from the Pentagon, and it just looks small. Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah, it doesn't look it'd be the right ratio of fire to... Yeah,
to say that there would be that much jet fuel in the plane that crashed into it, it doesn't seem like it's that much of an explosion. Now, I guess people could say that, most of the explosion was on the inside. But the thing that I don't understand about the so-called explosions on the inside is that, going back to the BBC documentary that we saw, it said that they came out as like bursts of fire, which is why we saw the round hole. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to sit here and claim I'm a scientist by any means, but I have not once experienced or even heard about, except for that one event, heard about a fire that contains itself to a spherical shape as it's going through.
Unless, of course, it was kind of part of the plane well, I don't know, because where's the wings? We've kind of already gone over that.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's bemusing.
It's the whole Pentagon issue that really confuses me about the event.
And on top of that, let's give a little bit of a wider context. There was the missing trillions that the Pentagon announced, I believe, a day or a week before 9/11 happened. And it just so happens the plane crashes into the department that was looking in to try and find those missing trillions that they lost in their system due to strange accounting or whatever. So there's certain motives that you could latch onto it if we were going to put it in a wider context. But are there any other points that you wanted to make today?
Just very quickly, the final one is Building 7. Now, I know everyone knows that the whole controlled demolition look of it. But, there is no reason, in my opinion, for that building to have fallen. It doesn't, there were buildings that were directly beneath the World Trade Center that, yes, did take substantial damage from the falling buildings, but did ultimately stay standing. I mean, I think there was a hotel that was directly underneath them, and although it took a lot of damage, it still the actual structure of it was still standing. So why did this building, about 7 hours after the North Tower collapsed, which was the final one, why 7 hours afterwards it just suddenly fell?
Well, I have a good idea, because there's video of firefighters saying, "There's a bomb in the building, please move out." So maybe there was a bomb in the building, and maybe it was demolished.
And what about
there's a possibility there.
And what about the whole BBC announces the collapse of the World Trade Center 7, despite the fact the building stood behind them?
And that makes the conspiracy road trip program even more hilarious. The fact that the BBC reports early that Building 7 collapsed, and then on the program supposedly investigating 9/11, they don't even mention Building 7 at all.
Exactly. It's ridiculous. But I'll just really quickly, I'll wrap up with a couple more things just about that, everything in general. Firstly, it really annoys me when people question the things I bring up like this, and questions people like you, Keelan, and your listeners and things like that, because they have the audacity to call us crazy, call us nuts, call us insane.
Most haven't looked at it, so I don't know how they can even form an opinion.
Well, what annoys me the most, though, is that and I don't mean to jab at religion. I don't know how many, of your listeners are religious, but the people who call us crazy for not believing an so-called official story, are the same people that believe there's a man in the sky that created the Earth in 6 days. I'm sorry, what? That doesn't quite make sense to me. And the other thing is that American presidents have lied before. They've lied at least 3 times. Nixon with Watergate. Can we forget Clinton with Monica Lewinsky?
And actually, Clinton's body count as well. I'm not sure if you know much about Clinton, but it seems like he had 2 boys off on, I can't remember where it was, but just Google Clinton body count. There's lots of suspicious things surrounding Clinton.
Exactly. And then, of course, we've got Bush. We've got George Bush, who then said, a couple of years after 9/11, he said, "Oh yeah, we did have knowledge of the terrorist attacks. We just didn't do anything." Yeah, well, you were saying for 5 years before it that you didn't know it was going to happen. You've basically just admitted you've lied.
Well, the whole Afghan invasion was already drawn up on his table the day before. They'd already been planning an invasion of Afghanistan, and then all of a sudden they get the perfect pretext to carry out that invasion of Afghanistan. So, let's not be naive.
And also, can we not forget that George Bush did not get into office, as far as I'm aware, he didn't get into office legally, because he did not win the 2000 election.
I did see something about sort of voter fraud with the machines or something like that, but it's not something I've looked into deeply.
Well, let's just put it this way. Florida was the state that voted for Al Gore, and then suddenly went, "Oh no, it's George Bush." I just find that a bit weird, considering that George Bush's brother, Jeb Bush, was the governor of Florida at the time.
But the funny thing is, even if Al Gore got in, or whatever, it's not like he's any better.
It's not like it's any better, but you know what I mean? It's just, this guy, he's it's just, and I just don't understand why people are like that.
Well, I think a good percentage of the public are more interested in status, in what other people think of them, rather than actual facts. And I get this with many things, not just 9/11, just mundane things. But when you try and debate, or even just have a conversation with somebody about something, you can give them facts, you can talk about scientific studies, but if they feel your position is uncool, or it's not a part of the hive, or if it hurts their ego because they have to concede that they were wrong, they'll just ignore you. They'll talk over you. They'll disagree. Even if you're presenting them with facts, they'll just walk off and ignore you, or try and shout you down and win that way. Because it's not about truth for them. It's about feeling comfortable. It's about being part of a society that they think is simple and it works this way. And if they concede that the government's lying to them, then things get a lot more scary. So they like to just carry along in their illusion as long as they got their house, their car, which some people haven't got anymore. But as long as they've got their house and their car, they feel like they're happy being lied to because they just feel more comfortable that way.
Well, it goes back to what I said about the whole, and I'm sorry, but it goes back to the whole religion thing again. 200 years ago, you would have been called crazy for not believing there's a man in the sky. It's like
their man is the prime minister or Obama.
Yeah, exactly. If you start you start criticizing somebody's leader, then they will just ignore you because they don't want to believe it's true. And the problem is that, of course, these leaders, they have numbers behind them. You could, the whole reason, in my opinion, why the official story is so, everyone's believing in it is because so many people have told them it. If one person tells you one story, chances are you're not going to believe it. If two people tell you the same story, you think it's a coincidence. If 3 people start telling you the exact same story, you start believing it.
Well, I think to some degree as well, some people, they don't really watch the news in detail. So a lot of people don't even really know the official story. They don't even really know the general facts. They just know Bin Laden, terrorists. But if you watch some of the recent videos by We Are Change and Alex Jones and whatnot, who they went down on the street and asked people, and a lot of them have never even heard of Building 7. So they don't even know the basic kind of outline of that day. And something I found quite remarkable, I covered this several months ago now. Russia Today did a piece the other day on it, jogged my memory. Something like 90% of Afghanistan citizens have never even heard of 9/11. So we're over there bombing and murdering the shit out of innocent villagers and farmers and even Taliban. And the majority of the people there don't even know why America's there. If that's going to change hearts and minds, and these people don't even know why these stormtroopers are blowing the shit out of them, how's that going to make them, support this invasion? It's crazy.
Keelan, you've put it more perfectly than I ever could. You really have. But anyway, I won't take up any more airtime of your show.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. If you've got any websites or whatever you want to plug, if people want to check out some of your films or whatnot.
I'll just say, listen to the Supla on WrestlingTruth.com. There you go.
Okay, well, you're not supposed to say that. The other guy said we shouldn't say that.
Oh, well, never mind. I've said it. Anyway, thank you for having me, mate.
Okay, cheers. I'll try and... I don't even know how to end the call properly without...
I'll figure it out.
Okay, I think I'm still on the air. Hopefully. Anyway, there was one more story I wanted to touch on today that isn't 9/11 based. And that's something, I can't remember who it was, but somebody sent me it, I think, on YouTube or something like that. EU propaganda, or how news is supposed to go on the Euro payroll but stay independent. And this comes from the Mail Online. And this is about how the EU are basically trying to get their financial claws into European media outlets. This is how it starts. First, a European commissioner, in this case Philip Kahler, the head of Euronews, the broadcaster of so-called EU Perspective News, which is 25% funded by the Commission, identifies a problem, which is, according to Kahler, the fact that news broadcasters in Europe are largely dependent on advertising and subscription. Not that Kahler explains why this is a problem. So this guy who's part of the EU Commission behind Euronews, he's saying that because other news channels have advertisers funding them, it's a major problem. And he's coming in and saying that the EU needs to fund these things instead. The Euronews boss proposes a solution to this problem. He wants the EU to impose a license fee, i.e. a new tax on all of us, to be taken by the EU, but distributed by independent, bodies outside the control of national governments. The money will go to a number of media organisations. Yes, not all, just a number. As in, the new tax revenues will go to broadcasters anointed by the Eurocrats. If this idea follows the usual pattern, expect at some point more polls financed by the European Commission, which will claim to have identified a desire among citizens of the EU to be better informed about the EU. And that, yes, EU citizens would be willing to pay extra tax to be better informed. So basically, the EU is swooping in and it wants to start promoting the EU in a positive light, and they're going to start funding news organisations to do that. Absolutely marvellous. You know, it's not enough that 80 bloomin' heck. It's not enough that 80+% of our laws are made in the EU. Now they want their hands on independent media. And I wouldn't say that's anything surprising. After all, it is a super state that's unelected, and we know the way it's headed, but to see it all come to fruition, it's not really a nice thing to see. And it kind of dovetails with a strange email I got from a charity called UK 360, who contacted me. I'll read out this email to you. I am very impressed by the quality of your video content and was hoping we might be able to collaborate as part of a new project we are launching in November. UK 360 is a new community news program which will go to air on the community channel from November of this year. UK 360 is a brand of Media Trust, a charity organisation in partnership with the BBC. Our aim is to reach out to local communities and citizen journalists across the UK whose voices and stories are unheard. We are looking to recruit local citizen journalists and let me get to the point. It's part of a wider endeavour by the Media Trust to create beacon hubs of local citizen journalism across the UK, which will hopefully empower local groups to tell their stories. And then later on the guy said, oh, well, no, it's not really in partnership with the BBC. But basically, I don't know how to take this. I mean, if they give me free reign to make a video that's going to air on some channel, then, I mean, that might be okay. But it seems like what they're trying to do is get independent journalists and sort of hook them onto the BBC fishing line, which obviously I don't want to have any part in. But just sort of share you some of these stories about media being kind of steered and consolidated and stuff. But that pretty much wraps things up for me tonight. Be sure to come back and check out the Reality Check show with Bluebus in 30 minutes. That'll be 9:30. But from me, that's about it. Cheers, guys.
This the random man is so unjust, and the children don't know who to trust.